Hello!
Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Biggest I Ever Had with Dan and Dave. So in the teaser, you might have heard it, you might not have heard it, we basically picked a random year and we're going to talk about our favourite chart hit, one of the hits that we don't like, one that's underrated, such and such. We're basically just going to talk about music.
Yeah.
And the year that we got from the first go at the random number generator is 2006.
We're hoping for a bit more sort of interaction from people this series, so instead of us just focusing on one song and one artist and going on about that for 50 minutes, there may be things that we overlook from the year. We are just focusing on number one singles, just because if we looked at an entire year in music, it's kind of infinite.
Yeah, we'd have to do like a series for 1 year, wouldn't we?
You could literally pick any year in music and do 20 hours worth of content on it. But as Dave said, it starts with the year 2006.
Yeah. And what do you remember about 2006, Dan?
I was quite pleased it was this year because, obviously, being born in the sort of early 90s, as we both were, one issue we have is that if anything pre sort of, 98, maybe, I'm not really going to remember.
Yeah.
So it's all sort of retrospective. And certainly, like, if you picked a list from, 1955, for example,
Yeah.
I might know, like, the Elvis songs or the Buddy Holly songs that turn up, but I'm not going to know probably most of the chart, which means preemptively I'm having to listen to a chart and I'm listening to every single song in 2021 with the perspective of it being 2021. So I was glad it was 2006 because I there wasn't a single song on this list I hadn't heard or didn't know. There were a couple that I'd forgotten about.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, reading through this list, I was like, oh, okay, this is an easy one. I don't need to go and listen to any of these songs and go...
The majority of the songs on this list, I remember turning on Channel 4 in the morning when I was getting ready for school and actually seeing, like, the music videos.
What was your first impressions of... And again, like I said, we're just focusing... I don't want to reiterate this point throughout the whole series, but before people go, you missed out this band, you missed out this... We're only looking at the number one singles and only in the UK. So...
Yeah.
When you looked down the list of number one singles from 2006, was there anything that stood out to you?
So what stood out to me is that the X Factor contestants dominated this number one chart.
Yeah, that really stood out to me. I was surprised. I mean, there's 3 separate X Factor contestants that are in, like, that appear on the list, and they all sort of continue for several weeks. The other thing that stood out to me was there are actual bands in this list.
Yeah, shocking, isn't it?
And so if you skip forward even, like, 3 years to, like, 2009, not that I want to get ahead of ourselves because we might end up doing an episode, but there's no bands. Or if there is, it's maybe, like, Coldplay.
Yeah, very, very big established bands.
Yeah, there are bands, like, there's a couple bands in here that have pretty much debuted, like, their debut single or one of their first singles is number one. And I don't think that's happening a couple years later. I just don't think the musical landscape is having that kind of impact. And the other thing that stood out was this, to me, is the first year where we see the impact of technology in 2 senses.
Yes, definitely.
The internet, in particular, things like MySpace. It was a bit early. I think Facebook existed in 2006, but nobody was using it. This was like MySpace years. And the other one is the iPod.
Yeah.
And digital downloads. There's a couple songs in this list which, if they hadn't been used in adverts and then been put to the front page of iTunes, I don't think they would have been number one singles. A year or 2 years earlier, that wasn't happening. So this, to me, is kind of a transitional year between CDs and... I mean, almost we've kind of gone out of it. We've sort of gone through the early... say, I don't know, 1995 to 2004, the dominant medium of consuming music is CDs.
Yeah.
2005 to maybe, like, 2011, it's downloads, and then sort of 2012 onwards it's streaming.
Yeah.
We're kind of, in my mind, and again, I'm probably simplifying things and there's always crossover, I feel like 2006 is a very transitional year where
it is,
people are moving away from singles charting because they're buying, like, a physical CD, and now they're just downloading it straight from iTunes.
Well, this is the last year that to be a chart hit you had to have a physical copy released. So from 2007 they actually expanded it so that if it was a download only single, that was included in the charts. Yeah,
and that seems weird now because it's just the standard, and in fact we've kind of gone beyond that now. I remember when downloads came out thinking, well, nothing's going to, like, that's it.
Yeah.
We've reached the end goal. There was a joke in an episode of Kenan and Kel in the 90s where, because, like, everything was getting smaller,
Yeah.
Like, you went from having, like, records to cassettes to CDs to, like, mini discs, which didn't really catch on, but, like, they were kind of supposed to be the next step. There was, like, a joke in Keenan and Kel where they had, like, these tiny microscopic CDs that everyone, like, carried around. It was, like, an episode set in the future. And I remember thinking, like, haha, yeah, that's probably what it will be like. Then downloads came along and it was like, no, there won't even be a physical thing. You know, it will digitally exist.
Yeah.
And okay, yeah, MP3s and digital downloads existed before 2006, but I don't feel it was mainstream and it was the standard until around about now.
Who was the first major artist to release a song as download only?
I believe it was David Bowie.
It was 1993 Jump, they say, from Black Tie, White Noise. Yeah. I believe. You check me, tell me if I'm wrong.
So, I mean, he was always a huge adopter of the internet, was Bowie. Was it Bowie.net?
Oh, yeah, BowieNet, yeah. He had his own, like, browser, didn't he?
It was kind of like OnlyFans, but without the sex. Because it was all about... Because you paid a subscription. I might be misremembering, like, articles I read in, like, the Virgin Megastore magazine in, like, 2002. But I remember, like, you subscribed, like, $50 a month to, like, Bowie.net, and you got, like, exclusive photos and occasional exclusive songs. And also, like, you could email Bowie... Yeah. And he would, like, maybe respond to you. And, like, now, with social media and with some people even going as far as having, like, an OnlyFans account, that is kind of the standard now.
Yeah.
So he was kind of weirdly ahead of the trend of that sort of paying for that user interaction with an artist. But yeah, anyway, to keep things back on track a little bit, 2006. What was... I think we've talked in previous episodes about talent contests, and I'm not, like, angry about them. I just feel they're kind of soulless.
Yeah, yeah.
Some great artists have come out of, like, the X Factor. I don't want to slag the entire thing off as a medium, but looking down the list here, like I said, there's 3 artists that appear. The first one's Shane Ward with the song That's My Goal, which opens the year.
It's forgotten, basically. I've not heard that since that year.
No. Like, I originally thought that it was probably, like, a cover.
Yeah.
Because usually X Factor artists, like, their big singles are covers. I think it is actually an original song, but I'd never heard it before. When I listened to it back, I kind of was like, oh yeah, maybe remember that being used somewhere.
Yeah.
But again, it's completely forgettable. And it was number 1 for 3 weeks, which is insane.
Yeah. Crazy.
The next number 1 by an X Factor artist, I kind of want to go into more detail in a second, so I'll just sort of mention it now, was Chico.
It's Chico time.
It's Chico time, which we'll talk about in a second, because to me it kind of flags up another trend, which started to die out around about now.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll move on to that. And then the final one, the year ends with Leona Lewis with her cliched cover of A Moment Like This, which is a real rehash. I think I mentioned in the episode in series 1, I can't remember which one we did, but we talked about Simon Cowell. It might have been the Will Young episode.
We talk about him a lot. We say some very bad things about Simon Cowell.
But I talked about how Kelly Clark, he kind of has a habit of rehashing his career.
Yeah, was it the Unchained Melody one?
Unchained Melody,
He kept releasing that one over and over again.
Yeah, and A Moment Like This, he was the judge on the first series of American Idol, which had Kelly Clarkson. Kelly Clarkson's big single that she released was A Moment Like This. Fast forward about 5 or 6 years, and he has Leona Lewis release a cover of A Moment Like This.
Nice.
So again, it's just Simon Cowell printing money by doing the most generic middle of the road thing.
Yeah.
Nothing really interesting to say about that, to be honest. I mean, it's fine. Leona Lewis has a nice voice.
Yeah, she does.
Shane Ward sounds a little bit like a pub singer, but he's not bad. He'd be a good pub singer. Yeah, that's not a criticism, but he's a pub singer. He's not exactly anything special.
It's just very telling that this is less than like 2 decades ago and we haven't heard anything from him since.
And also, like, he kind of stepped away from a music career and he was in Coronation Street for a bit. And he was very good in Coronation Street. I don't want to slag off Shane Ward and suddenly be like, this man is awful, how dare he? I'm just like... His career stopped being music and he had talent in other areas and that's what he went towards.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of stands out to me. It's X Factor dominate. So I feel like we should talk about the third X Factor act that's on the list, which is Chico. Now, I don't remember this series of X Factor.
Yeah.
But I do remember Chico. He kind of stayed around for a little while. He was sort of like, he was on those like low rent reality shows where you didn't even need to be a celebrity. People just needed to recognise your name.
Yeah.
You know, like they would have accepted anybody. If Harold Shipman hadn't killed himself and had been like available, they would have booked Harold Shipman on Celebrity Coach Trip because you know who he is. Like that's how Z-list these celebs were. And Chico had like a good career for about 2 or 3 years afterwards of those kind of shows. But his song it's called It's Chico Time. And it basically consists of him talking about how it's Chico's time. I'm assuming that was some sort of catchphrase that he did during the show. I didn't watch it. I don't care enough about Chico to look up the backstory of It's Chico Time. Maybe it was invented in a studio. I don't know. Who cares, to be honest with you?
Yeah.
But one thing it does show to me that I don't think that song would be a number one single these days.
No.
Not because we've suddenly all got good taste and good sense in music, but because the novelty single in itself has kind of died out.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, apart from, the yearly Lad Baby entries
but
into
that's
the
still
chart
for
Christmas.
charity.
Yeah,
There's
it's
still,
charity.
like... I'm talking, like... Around about this time also we had Crazy Frog, which I think was the year earlier. Like... These singles, and I remember them a lot in the 90s, like Teletubbies.
Yeah.
I don't know if these were all number ones, but things like Teletubbies, the song from South Park.
Yeah.
Like what else? The cartoons with, Witch Doctor. These sort of just really, like, clearly novelty songs. The one where the guy just went... It's been lost to time, but that got to number... Chris Moyles was, like, a fan of it. It was just a bloke making a noise.
Okay.
Yeah, nobody remembers it but me. But that got to... I think it got to number one. But that was kind of a thing in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Usually because a Radio 1 DJ would be like, ha ha ha, this thing is funny, and everyone would go out and buy it and it would get to number one. And that's probably how Chico got his number one, or at least it was probably at least bolstered by people doing that kind of thing. But I don't think it would happen today. I think the internet's kind of killed that off.
Unless there was some kind of movement behind a particular song going into the charts.
I mean, maybe you could argue Old Town Road. Maybe
it's
it's
not
a
like
stretching.
it's not
no,
made to be a joke though. It's Chico Time is definitely made to be a joke.
Yeah, I'm stretching the definition of what would be a novelty. And not only that, Lil Nas X has carried on having a career and is still like releasing singles and still, very much in the public conscious. As for after Chico's 5 Minutes of Fame, as I said, he hung about for a bit in crappy reality TV shows, but that was the end of Chico. I don't think there were many people clambering for a second, not even a second album, probably a second song from Chico.
Nobody's wondering where he's gone.
No. Do you think Chico's ever done a full concert? I mean, I'm guessing he probably does covers.
Yeah.
I could imagine him doing like a cover of like Ice Ice Baby, like Jedward or something like that. But what do you do? Like he comes out and it's like, hey, it's Chico time! He
does that for 1.5 hours.
Yeah, just 1.5 hours of like, hey, I end at 9. It's only 7:30. 1.5 more hours of the Chico time.
That's definitely what he does.
That's definitely what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
he was having fun. That's the thing I like.
Yeah.
I don't think you can criticise that too much because it is just a novelty.
Yeah,
it's not meant to be serious. It's not meant to be a statement.
I don't hate Chico. I'm not like against him. I'm not like offended by the song's existence.
You are anti-Chico.
I'm probably less angry by Chico than I was like Bryan Adams or Robson and Jerome.
We're diverting too much. We should be talking about what song we do like because we're being negative. And in season 1, we learned that being negative wasn't good for viewership. Okay, we spent far too long talking about 2006. We should probably start talking about the songs.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of... Originally, when we first planned this second series, we had, like, a best, worst, okay kind of thing. And I sort of wanted to move away from that, because I've mentioned before, I don't like the word best, because best it's completely subjective. Yeah. And even my version of what is best changes on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes, like, I'll be in a mood and I'll go, this is amazing, and then 2 days later I'll go, I hate this thing. So I kind of wanted to go, at this very moment, if I was reading down every single song in this list, what is my, I guess, favourite, or thing that I would most recommend, maybe. Yeah. And one track immediately stood out to me, and I don't know if it's the same, because we haven't discussed before this episode what we were going to say, But for me, it had to be. It was the longest selling. It was the longest number one of 2006. It's the biggest selling single of 2006. Most years, I think that we're probably going to go against public opinion, but I think this year, certainly I am going for the obvious option, which is Gnarls Barkley with Crazy.
Yeah, and I think I just echo that. It's a great single. A debut single as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's for those who don't know, Gnarls Barkley, they were sort of a band, but kind of a duo. It was sort of an experimental project between Danger Mouse, who was a very famous DJ in New York, producer, kind of behind the scenes man, and CeeLo Green, who was kind of the same around about this time, but was also sort of branching out. You know, he did a lot of features on rap singles, and it was kind of a bit more of the face of Gnarls Barkley. This song was kind of an experiment.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they never really recaptured the magic of this song, but I don't think that matters, because I think it was lightning in a bottle, and they hit onto something. And I remember when I first heard this song being like, I have never heard anything that sounds like this.
No, it's futuristic, but at the same time, it's quite timeless. Like, I think that you could have said that has been written and recorded in any decade from like the 60s onwards.
Yeah,
it's so like, I wouldn't say non-distinct to a particular year, but it's just it would apply to so many different situations, so many genres.
Yeah, I always felt like CeeLo's singing on that track. He sounds like he could have recorded it like in the studio with like Ray Charles in like 1958, right. But the production itself sounded super contemporary in 2006, and even now in 2021, listening 15 years later, any artist that has production sounding like that would sound contemporary.
Yeah.
And I think I get what you mean by it sounds timeless in that there's nothing about that track that dates it.
No. Yeah, that's exactly.
It sounds like, you know, I if it wasn't for the fact that it came out in 2006, if you asked me if you had an alien who had never, you know, knew nothing about what year songs came out, and you asked them what year did this song come out, I don't think they'd be able to tell you.
No.
Because apart from the production being, like I said, it's electronic instruments and, you know, there's sort of DJ scratches and that kind of thing. But even then, it doesn't date the track. You know, there's nothing gimmicky about it. There's nothing that you go, oh, that was a trend that they were riding, or are they, everyone and if I walked into the studio right now as a musical artist and I said to somebody, make me a song that sounds like Crazy, I don't know what that would mean. How would you do that?
Yeah,
right. What would that mean? That's just the most open-ended statement, because the song to me is so, I don't know, unique.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have nothing but praise for that song. It's just, like I said, it's a perfect pop song.
Yeah.
There are songs which, like, I am completely fine with you, like, disliking or liking things and having a personal opinion. So if you said to me I hated Crazy, I wouldn't get cross at you, but I would go, how?
Yeah, there's, like, nothing offensive about it. There's nothing that you could object to, really. The singing's fantastic, the music's fantastic.
At the time, it was a bit overplayed. Yeah. But that's not the song's fault. No. That's radio DJ. It was such a good song, radio DJs wanted to play it constantly.
Yeah, well, Zane Lowe had it as the opening music for his show, didn't he? But the thing that they did to stop it being overplayed is they actually pulled the single, because they wanted it to not become this massive overplayed thing. They wanted people to be able to look back at it and not think, oh my god, I've heard this so many times, let's switch the track.
Yeah, no, it's such a brilliant track, and I think it'll have a resurgence every few years in the same way like Bohemian Rhapsody has. Like every few years, it's like a new generation discovers Bohemian Rhapsody in some form, and I feel like Gnarls Barkley's it's overdue for that to happen. Yeah. It's overdue for somebody to like meme it and to be like, oh my god, look at this amazing song from 15 years ago. Like, this is the best song ever.
It is a classic.
If this song recharted tomorrow because it was used in an advert, I'd go, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think people have forgotten about it, but I feel like when somebody reminds people about how great it is, it could be huge again. It could have a second life, even though it had an incredibly successful first life.
Well, it's the kind of song that I still hear played, like, in various places, whether that's going out to like a shop, it may be playing in the background. It's whether I'm at a party, it may be playing on the radio, on the stereo. I've got it on my iPhone, so it's on circulation when I listen to music in the car. It's just one of the songs that I can see people enjoying in various situations, and I wouldn't skip that. I wouldn't go, I don't want to listen to it.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Sometimes you can't really put into words why something is so genius, and this is one of those tracks. They just did everything right.
Yeah.
You know, like, if you were to... You could write, like, a 50,000 word, like, thesis on why Crazy is a perfect song. You know? You could strip it down. Like, it's just so... Like I said, it's just so on the ball for everything. I don't have anything bad... And I actually am interested if somebody could give me a criticism beyond I've heard it too many times, or... Obviously, unfortunately, CeeLo Green has kind of brought himself into some controversy with some things that happened later in his career, but that to me doesn't detract from the song. We've talked before, you know, you can be a kind of bad person and still make great music. Not that I'm saying CeeLo Green is a bad person, I'm just saying, you know, I understand it's a complicated scenario.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't know how you could criticise it as music.
It's underplayed. That's my criticism. It should be everywhere. Have it on the soundtrack in my brain.
When if I was to make a movie and set it in the year, 2006, the opening shot would use this song. That's what I would do.
Yeah, it really is the best of pop for that year.
Yeah.
Maybe even the decade.
Possibly. I mean, it's tough because then I might pick an Amy Winehouse song.
Yeah, true.
But I don't know. Maybe we'll do a decade roundup when we've done a few episodes on a decade.
And it was groundbreaking as well, because this is the first single that got to number one based on downloads.
Just downloads alone.
Just downloads.
Yeah, which again relates back to what we were saying with, physical sales are suddenly being less important. The internet's coming into its own, and being the internet as we know it today, I kind of feel like we're in stage 3 of the internet. Stage 1 was like the 90s internet that university campuses used.
Yeah, kind of exclusive.
Yeah, not really a thing. Stage 2 internet was what we grew up with like MySpace, Bebo, like YouTube that would take ages to load, and forums and Neopets. And then we're in stage 3 now, which is kind of just like angry Twitter.
Yeah, the activism stage.
The activism stage, but this is very much like prime stage 2.
Before
internet.
All the fake news happened, before all the people arguing and having very polarised opinions. The happy phase of the internet.
A simpler time.
Where people would just discover songs and be
share
happy,
them to each other and be
them.
happy and not hate each other for not loving it.
Yeah.
So the next thing I want to move on to is, I kind of have this again in my notes as like quote unquote the underrated song.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that listeners wouldn't know this song, but more like we want to draw attention to it.
Yeah.
I had kind of a couple choices for this.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'll be the same as you, because again, I don't know what you've picked. But for me, it was kind of both sort of dance tracks, which surprised me, because I'm not particularly... This is probably where I'm projecting where I was in life. So when I was a teenager, as we both were, with the same age, but I was living in Brighton, and dance music was huge in Brighton. So maybe, and obviously I was too young to go to clubs and things, but you still kind of soak up the culture in that it's on the radio. And the two songs that I kind of wanted to draw attention to were Mech featuring Leo Sayer, which I believe is a sample of an old Leo Sayer song, Thunder in My Heart. Okay. Again, is actually the full track, but I just know it's Thunder in My Heart, I feel thunder in my heart. And the other one, which is Put Your Hands Up for Detroit.
Oh, God, I remember that.
Yeah, those two tracks, to me, are synonymous with, like, that summer. They were played constantly.
Yeah, that's true.
As I said, I wasn't going to nightclubs. It wasn't like I was in Ibiza with glow sticks at the front, but they were played constantly on the radio, and so they're a snapshot of that time. There was kind of a lot of like Eurodance acts that would kind of have one big single, and you'd never hear of them again.
Yeah.
But they kind of, those two songs stood out for me as not necessarily underrated, but it's kind of a subgenre. I don't know. I wouldn't call it Europop. Just sort of like other artists would be like Casada, or the one that she was in Hollyoaks and they had her as the lead singer. Them, and like there were lots of acts like that who were big around about the same sort of time. Names off the top of my head escape me, but I kind of think of it as like music that when you got later in the Sky channels would play. You'd be like, oh look, like I've gone past MTV and VH1, I'm now into the like slightly weird music channels, and it would show those kind of songs.
Yeah, I have a really distinct. Every time I hear "Put Your Hands Up for Destroy," obviously I haven't heard it in ages because it's kind of like slipped off the radar, but it is a good song. I just think of sitting in a geography class because someone there was a substitute teacher, and they let us play music, and someone put that on constantly, like throughout the entire lesson, and so I just have vivid memories of being in a geography class.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Geography is what that gives me. So for my underrated song, this is going to be very controversial because everyone thinks this is a bad song. It's Sandi Thom's "I Wish I Was a Punk Rocker with Flowers in My Hair."
See, I think it's a bad song, but...
See, I don't get why you'd not like it. It's kind of another nostalgic song. It's looking back to a simpler time. And the thing that I like about it is it's essentially just a percussion track. There's no instrumentation, which is already quite good when you compare it with all like the overproduced dance music that's appearing in the charts at the same time. So I think that's quite unusual, quite punk. Although Sandi Thom was really heavily criticised by people at that time about how unpunk it was for punks to have flowers in their hair, but they're kind of missing the point that it's not about that. It's about...
I feel like it's like invoking the 70s, but with the like ideals of the 60s, maybe. It's supposed to be an oxymoron. They're supposed to contrast.
Yeah, because it's about being naive.
Yeah.
It's about wanting for a naiver, simpler time without technology, which is ironic because this is one of the songs that first broke through on MySpace.
MySpace, yeah.
She was originally signed to, I think it was Sony BMG. She released the punk rocker single in 2005, but it flopped. No one bought it. So she started putting on webcasts on MySpace, there was a lot of money behind it, so it's not quite as organic as she claims it to be.
Yeah.
But they started off only like 60, 70 people watching, but by the end of the series of 21 concerts from her basement flat, she was getting like 70,000 streams.
Which even by today would be pretty good, numbers.
It really was kind of like a sign of the times that the internet was going to become this big sensation for finding new talent. But yeah, she was criticised by Charlie Brooker as being the Antichrist of music.
Wow. I mean, that's quite a big, bold statement from Charlie. Charlie Brooker's kind of like backtracked a lot of the very negative things he said in the 2000s, kind of saying like, he never thought he'd meet the people.
Yeah.
So,
but I think he's just being overly pretentious.
That is Charlie Brooker's kind of...
Yeah, because it is an overexposed song, but I just like the catchiness, the way that she can catch people's attention with just these bare minimums, the tambourines, the claps, the shaker, and her voice. And the music video was really inventive as well. It was really low budget. It was just a handheld camera, but she would speed up and slow down, and she had to learn her song basically twice as fast and twice as slow to have this one continuous shot of her walking while people are doing various dances and movements around her. So I really don't get the hate for this.
I'll let you accept it as like it being an underrated track. It's fine. I mean, if you put it as your best, I would have been like, really?
Yeah, it's
crazy.
not the best.
Not that we do
Gnarls
best.
Barkley's
but,
Crazy is my particular favourite of that year. Although there were several other good songs on that list. But I think people misunderstood it because obviously the punk rockers don't really have flowers in their hair. They're more anger and heroin than peace and weed.
So the next thing I kind of wanted to talk about is we will... Obviously, in an entire year, there's a lot of number one singles. And there's things that maybe, like I said, they don't fit into a specific category, but we should at least kind of mention. The first one that kind of comes to mind is this was the year that Take That had their big resurgence.
Yeah.
They were number one for basically all of December, pretty much, with their comeback single, Patience. Bands have had comebacks, but... Take That were bigger second time round than they were first time round, or at least that's my interpretation of it. Because although they probably sold more records in the 90s, selling 1 million records in 2006 is more impressive than selling 5 million records in 1996. I mean, I know that I don't know the exact figures, but to me, like, it's a much harsher landscape.
And I think their comeback actually gained them, instead of chart sales, it was more about musical recognition as well, because people generally tend to say that the songs that they released when they came back are better than the ones that they charted with back in their heyday.
I think there was kind of a reprisal of their older hits as well.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of like, in the 90s, it was like, they're just a boy band.
Yeah.
And so suddenly, like, they come back, they have this big song, Patience, it goes to number 1, it's hugely successful. They then follow that up the next year with Shine, which is even bigger, which was their next single. But talking just about 2006, you kind of go, like, suddenly the critics are like, oh, well, they're actually good. Yeah. And I think it's kind of, it's less, oh, they're good now, and more, oh, they were always good, it's just now we can take them as being good.
Now we can't be embarrassed by saying they're good.
I'm not going to be ashamed to take that, like, cassette or CD in my car.
Yeah.
And I mean, it shows the power of Gary Barlow's songwriting. Just pay some fucking tax, please. You know? I think they paid it back, but still.
Yeah.
Jason
Don't
Orange,
sue us, please.
Jason Orange paid all his tax, so, and Robbie wasn't in the band at the time, so it wasn't Robbie's fault. But yeah, so that's one thing that I kind of sort of felt was an honourable mention. The other honourable mention that stuck out to me, well, one that I'm just going to sort of, I think this is the last year Madonna had a number 1 single, or the most recent time she had a number 1 single, but it's a fairly forgettable song, so who cares about it? The Arctic Monkeys.
Yeah.
Which I think is the last time they had a number 1. I think they've only had 2 number 1 singles. Their debut single, I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, and their second single, When the Sun Goes Down, both went straight into number 1. And then I think their other singles didn't do as well, but the only reason they didn't do as well was because the album was, like, stupidly successful, so people stopped buying singles because the album
was on the album.
You know, I wasn't going to go and buy a single copy of Fake Tales of San Francisco. I already had the album.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they're another band where they've kind of downplayed the impact that MySpace had on their career. They're sort of like, fans were sharing the songs, but, you know, we still went out and did those gigs. Like, they've always kind of shied away from going, we owe our career to social media. But they were certainly, the narrative in the media at the time was, there was this band from Sheffield who never would have got out of Sheffield if people hadn't put their songs on MySpace and everyone started listening to them. I mean, like anything, it's probably not as simple as that anyway.
Yeah. They were a good band as well.
They were, and they still kind of are.
Even if they got found on the internet, that's good.
Yeah.
The internet did a good this time.
I feel like the Arctic Monkeys would have always been successful. Their material, particularly on the first album, was so strong. They were always going to have a great career. Maybe it just sped it up. Yeah. You know, maybe their debut single and their second single wouldn't have gone straight to number 1, but they would have charted. You know, I feel like when you write music that's really, really good, it's going to find an audience. Yeah. You know, there's no way that Arctic Monkeys were going to be this unheard of band.
Yeah, they would have still had an impact regardless of any hits. Because even if they weren't massively successful, they would have had a cult following.
Yeah, they could have been like the Smiths.
Yeah.
And that's not me comparing them and saying they're as good as the Smiths. I'm saying that the Smiths never had a number 1 single. Yeah. But maybe if MySpace had existed when the Smiths existed, maybe they would have done. Well, because fans could have met and could have shared the music, and that builds a fan base. Maybe. Who knows? This is me projecting a little bit, but yeah. And then going down the list,
there's some good songs that I quite like. Nasty Girl, Notorious B.I.G. That's a good song.
Yeah. Hips Don't Lie by Shakira, which charts twice. It kind of charts, and then a couple other singles come along and it recharts.
America by Razorlight.
See, I will talk about that in a second.
Okay.
Scissor Sisters, I Don't Feel Like Dancing.
That's a decent pop tune, isn't it?
That's a fantastic song. That was kind of, if Crazy hadn't been on the list, that probably would have been my second choice.
Yeah.
I love the Scissor Sisters, or at least their first album and a half. The first album's almost perfect. Yeah. Second album has some great tracks, but kind of peters out, and then apart from the song Fire, which I think is on their third album, I'm not quite sure. But apart from that, you don't really need to go much deeper into their discography. At least that's my opinion. But the Scissor Sisters were great. They were huge. Again, I was living in Brighton at the time. They were huge in Brighton. I believe they played Pride 2004. I didn't see them, but like everyone I went to school with saw them play Pride that year. But yeah, I mean, the Scissor Sisters were great and still are great. I don't want to.
And this is a fantastic pop tune.
It's a fantastic song. And again, it just reminds me of the summer. It makes me think of the summer, and
it makes me think of French lessons. because the chav kid in the class would try and sing it, but didn't know any of the words, so we'd just go, "Ah-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba." So yeah, it reminds me of French. So put your hands up for Detroit's geography, and this is French.
This is French. Yeah. No, it just reminds me of the summer, and it reminds me of, like I said, living in Brighton and, you know, it being played constantly on the radio. So the next part of the episode I kind of want to move to is, we're going to, like I said, this series we're going to try and be a hell of a lot more positive. But I don't want to act like I love everything, because I don't love everything.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and be a lot more reasoned in my opinions for disliking stuff. I'm going to try and make it a lot less personal. Like, you know, song bad instead of man who made song bad, or woman that made song bad. But I decided to name this, if you could delete any number one single from this year, what would it be?
Yeah.
So, do you want to go for yours first of all?
Oh, mine's going to be really controversial, because this is a very well-loved song. So I would delete Welcome to the Black Parade by My Chemical Romance.
See, it wasn't my pick. I don't have an issue with it, but I mean, I was never quote-unquote emo. I mean, My Chemical Romance themselves hated the term emo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what does it even mean? Who knows? But I remember I actually, reading the list, I was surprised. I didn't realise it had gone to number one. I thought Teenagers went to number one, which was maybe the follow-up
I like that song.
Yeah, I don't mind Teenagers. And it was in Saints Row 2 on the radio. But, like, I didn't know that this had actually got to number one. And it's kind of just dreary and, like...
Yeah, it's
I mean,
got like
it
a
picks up
marching band
afterwards,
intro,
yeah,
and then it goes into this like... when I listen to it, it reminds me of Slade and Noddy Holder, just because of his voice, this screaming, like, but quite nicely in tune voice.
Yeah.
And the thing that I don't like about it is it was massively overplayed at the time. Like, you couldn't get that music video off the television. And also, all of the emo kids would scream it at lunchtime.
Yeah.
And even now, when I go see my university friends... some of them will start singing this, like, really badly. They can't sing, stop singing.
I think being a teenager aged between 13 to 16 and during My Chemical Romance's peak, you either, they were your life or you hate them.
Yeah.
And I've got to be honest, I mean, I don't hate them because I've kind of sort of looked back on it and there is nostalgia because it's, like, even though I didn't listen to it at the time, I'm sort of like, yeah, but it reminds me of that time in my life. But... I wasn't a fan. No. I didn't own the album. I didn't listen to them. I had a friend who did, and he went and saw them again in Brighton. Yeah. They played the Brighton Centre, and all the emo kids at school went and were like, "It's the best thing ever," and they were amazing. And it didn't do it for me.
I do like his jacket that he wears in the music video, though, like the kind of Sgt. Pepper style.
I will say this: My Chemical Romance and Panic at the Disco, the two bands together. The one thing that I always sort of like celebrated them for was they had theatrics.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they had a style. It was kind of, you know, like I said, a little bit Sergeant Pepper, a little bit kind of Tim Burton films.
Yeah.
Sort of like, you know, a lot of girls that like had My Chemical Romance badges sewn into their backpack also had like the Nightmare Before Christmas badges and that sort of thing, or like the Nirvana like smiley face.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was
the amazing thing about My Chemical Romance is they did kind of, I don't know if they originated the emo movement, but they did massively fuel it with their popularity. So they had like basically a cult behind them. They inspired a cult.
They kind of did, but yeah. Shall I go for my delete?
Yeah, your delete.
You kind of already mentioned mine. Mine is America by Razorlight, and it's first of all I'm going to get the really nitpicky thing out the way. I hate Johnny Burrell from Razorlight. He seems like the biggest arsehole piece of shit ever. Every interview with him, he goes on about how he's a god of music, and you wrote Golden Touch, and that's an okay song. Everything else you made is wank. End of your career. But it's not just that. It's soulless, boring indie music. It's very by the numbers. It thinks it's more intelligent than it actually is.
Yeah.
It thinks it's a big, like, critique of America. It's like the British version of American Idiot. But American Idiot was like, oh my god, Bush administration, am I right? As for, like, America by Razorlight is like, yeah, America bad, because, like, it's just bad and, like, it's not good. Like, fuck you, Johnny Burrell. Take off your skinny white jeans and stop making shitty music. I said I wouldn't make this personal, but it's a bad song and I don't like it. And
I think it's fine. It's background music, basically.
yeah, and what's the point in it?
It's background music with an edge.
What's the point in it? And how did it get to number one? I don't know.
That is shocking. I don't get how it went to number one.
It must have been a bad week for music.
Because pretty much all of the other songs on this list are quite distinctive, and you can go, oh, actually, yeah, I can get that because it's a novelty. I can get that because it's someone who's massively popular doing it. But yeah, I just don't see.
There's a term that's become kind of. There was a Vice article that came out about a year or so ago, which talked about the top 50, what they referred to as landfill indie, which is kind of a derogatory term. They classed a lot of things. Basically, any guitar band that was making music between like 2002 and 2010, they counted as landfill indie, which is bollocks, and a very sort of like elitist opinion. But their definition of what they considered landfill indie was like disposable, heavily marketed crap indie music. And if anybody is the poster boy for that, it's Razorlight. Yeah. And maybe the Kooks. But, mostly Razorlight.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of where I felt. If I could I would just delete that one.
Yeah.
We don't need it. The world doesn't need America by Razorlight. It doesn't make the world necessarily a worse place, but it doesn't make it any better, nor does it even change anything. It can be gone, and we just would have given an extra week to the Scissor Sisters before My Chemical Romance came along and got to number one.
That solves it then.
Before we sort of end the episode,
we're going to go to Google, find a random number generator, and we're going to basically pick a year of chart history, and then we are going to do the next episode on that. So we have no idea what the next episode is going to be on.
Nope. And as I said, this year was quite nice because I knew all these songs. Even if I hadn't listened to them since they came out, I knew them all. This might be a year where I don't know any of the songs, in which case I'm going to have to do some homework.
Generating 1970.
1970.
That is a good year.
Yeah.
Oh, so much good stuff then.
The 60s end, the 70s begin.
Yeah, kind of the end of the hippie era.
Yeah, I wasn't born. My mum wasn't born. My dad was born, but he was 2 years old. Yeah, I think I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah, have you got anything off the top of your head that...
I don't know.
You don't know.
I mean, obviously the Beatles broke up in 1970, so I'm assuming Something was number one. Not as in like Something by the Beatles, as in the song literally called Something. Yeah. Mungo Jerry, would they have been around
Yeah,
then?
that in the summertime. Yeah, that was number one. We've got some Rolf Harris.
We've got some Rolf. We can talk about... Anyway, so we don't want to give away too much, but I'm quite pleased with that. I was worried it would be... Anything in the 50s or pre-1963 is going to be... That's going to be... Well, it's not going to be a struggle, but it's going to need some homework. Yeah. I should at least know, hopefully, at least 50% of this list.
So yeah, subscribe and like this video. Next week we're going to be talking about 1970s number one singles.
And comment, if you go on Wikipedia right now, find the top 40 from 2006. If there's something we didn't talk about, we'll try and reply to any comments that we get. And give us your suggestions for what you think your favourite, most underrated, and what one would you delete from the number one singles of 1970.
See you next time.
Cheers, bye.